Hello, and welcome to another session. I've been talking to a lot of people lately, and today we're going to go talk about something I deal with almost every day. Owners that have never intended to be landlords. And since DC's housing stock is about 25% are going to be in condos and co-ops, it's going to be a great opportunity for us to talk about what people experience when they purchase or transition that property from their home into an investment, because many of them didn't purchase it with that intention. Many of them purchased with that being their primary residence. But obviously, things happen. People relocate for work. We simply decide that selling wasn't the right move right now. In fact, there's plenty of articles that I've seen, of course, that landlords or homeowners are deciding that maybe now is not the best time, not the best market. And if you bought within the last couple of years, you may not necessarily sell for what you purchased for. With the raising mortgage rates and obviously the insurance and association fees, there's a big portion of the conversation which we're going to be able to touch on today. So what we quickly discover is that renting a condo or co-op is fundamentally different than renting out a single family home. All right, not all landlords are used to navigating the laws or the building's expectations or the restrictions or the governing documents or the board policies. And so EJF has a unique advantage in that capacity because we work on both sides of the equation. We manage rental properties as well as having the arm of the company that manages associations. So with that, we're going to dig into this. Now, my name's Conrad Bennett. I've been a realtor, a property manager, and working with independent homeowners for a very long time, navigating these next steps of their lives and their chapters with their properties, many of which are unintending to do so. But at the same time, we're going to be able to give guidance and direction to make sure that it goes as seamless as possible. Sarah Keller was going to join us today because she's seen both sides of the spectrum. She had managed associations in the past, but also managed a bunch of individual rental units as well. Would have brought a great dynamic to this, but unfortunately, she had a family emergency and isn't able to attend today. But I have her notes, and seeing as I've worked with Sarah for longer than I would like to admit on this webinar, we've had a great opportunity to work together on many sides of this, and I'm going to expand upon some of those things that we're going to run into, especially when many owners think that that hard part is about just finding the tenant, but there's so much more that goes into it and the complexity that follows. So I'm going to expand upon that today, utilizing some of her notes. And if there are any questions that you would have asked her that I may not be able to answer, as I don't manage associations directly, I promise that I can follow up with her and get some answers. So any of the questions that you have throughout this, you may be able to throw them into the Q&A. We'll revisit them towards the tail end. All right. So why does this matter, right? Renting within an association is a little different than if it's a single family home or even a rental building that many people may have as investments. But you know what? Truth is that DC's housing stock, about 25% of the residences in this city are either condos or co-ops. Significantly more condos than co-ops, and a small portion are going to be homeowners associations. But that's a pretty vast opportunity for owners that have real estate in the city to be able to expand upon what is going on and making sure that they know how to navigate these next steps. And so, in addition to knowing about finding a tenant and being able to secure and qualify them and all the other fun stuff that goes into being a landlord, you're also going to have to make sure that you comply with all of the association's rules and bylaws, and you have to operate under that expectation, and the residents themselves need to know what they are so that they can adhere to them. And so when you put this extra work onto this, of course, that actually does add additional layers of complexity to what may, for many, already be a overwhelming experience. Now, the reality is we're here. We do work with owners on this. We help navigate it. We do know many associations very, very well because we've managed in them before, and we know the property managers, not necessarily just under the EJF umbrella, but other companies around around town. And we're going to be able to help avoid those struggles and those pitfalls when we're involved from the beginning. All right. It gives us the opportunity to give you guidance and making sure that renting is smooth and compliant and profitable. So some of the things that we really like to look into are going to be what the building's rules may be. And I'm not going to specify what rules are in each building. That's going to be a little hard to do, but we're going to be painting in broad strokes today, just so that everybody knows that these are the things that you kind of have to keep an eye on. So right out of the gate, some of the things that we talk to owners about when we're beginning to figure out that next stage of their process and their plans is talking about parking. Whether or not the unit has them, if there's parking restrictions, if you're able to park wherever you wish, or if you have a dedicated space, or if there's no parking and it's just street. Allowances to park sometimes in the cul-de-sac, or even like a little drive-through or a driveway that the building may share. All of these things are relevant and matter for the resident, whether it's a short term, like their moving days, or if there's something that they need to do here and there. Pet policies is another big aspect that has come up a lot lately, just to make sure that we are in compliance with what the building will allow. And that might help you make a determination on whether or not you wish to let the resident have pets. Now, of course, I've mentioned this earlier, but moving procedures need to know what they are. Moving in nights and weekends is generally discouraged in many buildings, especially when they only have one elevator. That needs to be reserved for bigger projects like that, or whether or not they need to get a key to the elevator to make sure that they have access to it, or put the pads up before the move. All of these things are easy to not only define, but also share with the incoming tenant so that you're able to keep in compliance. Many buildings have move in and move out fees. Some of them are going to be captured on the front end. Some of them are expected to be paid on the back end. If that is a rule, then you're going to need to make sure that you track it so that when the residents do in fact vacate, we can make sure that the confirmations have been made, the payments have been made, and that the building won't be going back to you for those payments. Ideally, if the tenant did fail to make the payment, you're able to capture it in the security deposit before that's returned. But in the event that there's a delay and the security deposit has to be returned in that 45-day window, it's good to double check and make sure that you're not going to be left holding that expense after they're gone and you've returned the security deposit. Similarly, noise complaints. Obviously, most buildings are communal living arrangements, and everybody wants to ensure that everybody's enjoying their space appropriately. So if there are expectations that after 9 or after 10 at night or what have you, that they're going to be in compliance, because if there are challenges, the building's going to reach out to you as the owner, as the landlord, or us in your place as the property manager. And we need to rectify those situations and make sure the tenants are complying not only with that lease, but also with the building's rules, right? And similarly, and I'm going to expand upon this in another slide, but insurance requirements may shift. In fact, there's some upcoming legislation about adjusting the building's deductibles, because the condo association or co-op, they always have a policy in place. You as the owner would have a policy, and then the tenants should have a renter's policy. And so we're going to expand upon that. But the majority of the issues that we find are not caused by bad tenants. They're caused by owners that didn't fully understand the association's requirements before renting. And so these are easy things for us to navigate and walk through, and we always double check. Reaching out to the association, making sure that the board provides us up-to-date buildings, rules, and regs, because they do change. They evolve over time. And so you want to make sure you're always working off of the most recent version, right? So these are the things that you start to need to know first. And so I'm going to expand upon it. First and foremost, some associations have rental caps. You're going to want to know what those restrictions may be so that you can plan appropriately. If there's a waiting list, many of them do, they're going to need to make sure that you know what timeline is, where you stand on it, because whether or not you're going to remain living there until the cap opens up, or you're going to move out in anticipation that it becoming available to rent, there's still a lot of work that needs to get done before you vacating and the next tenant moving in. The place may need to be painted and cleaned and other repairs get done. There is going to be the licensing requirement, DEC's licensing expectations, which need to be navigated. Sometimes we work with owners well in advance to get that done and remove that variable from the large equation. But then ultimately, how long is it going to take to lease? What adjustments are you going to make to the price to make sure it leases in an appropriate timeline? And then, of course, making sure that you're able to get that lease over to the building to save your space and make sure that everything's able to proceed as planned, because you don't want to go through all these efforts to have no result, right? Now, there are buildings that have no restrictions. Great, you just need to know that, right? I have seen some associations imposing rental surcharges. I also know that with the waiting lists, they can be lengthy. They certainly do put some limitations on the number of rentals that will be allowed within any given building, which you need to be aware of. And of course, there is a chance that if it has been a rental for a long time, you may be able to stay under that rental cap, or maybe have like a grandfather exclusion on the rental capacity. But sometimes once the current resident vacates, you're back to square one. You need to know these things, right? And you certainly don't want to sign a lease with somebody without knowing all of these details, because we ultimately see a lot of owners do get hit with fines and penalties, which certainly would have been very easily to avoid and come quite costly, making that venture a lot less financially feasible, right? So as far as the condos and the co-ops, let's just break this down, right? In a condo, you have ownership of real property. Generally, there's fewer occupancy restrictions. In co-ops, you're owning a share of the building. A lot of the boards do often have making this more extensive, and the process and the reviews and the financial maybe a little more rigorous. And either they may call something like an interview or an orientation that may be required before a tenant may be able to move in. And all of this impacts the timing, right? Because for many cases, you may not necessarily be able to accept an application today and have somebody moving in this weekend. So you need to talk about those timelines with the potential applicants and make sure that they're able to adhere to it. But no two buildings are fully the same. We do want to make sure that we cross our T's and dot our I's and make sure that that's inclusive of the marketing efforts, so that there aren't any missed opportunities to convey it or surprises after the fact, right? Because vacancies are expensive and delays are expensive, and knowing the process ahead of time protects you and your income, right? Now, as far as compliance and protection, you want to avoid these costly mistakes. Or at least be aware of them, right? Because if the building does have a rental surcharge, still may make sense. You still will want to proceed, but you need to know it and make sure that you're ready to make those payments to the association if and when the property becomes a rental. And at the same time, make sure the association knows if it's no longer going to be used as an investment property, right? And so the association don't have the relationship with the tenants. They have the relationships with you. They may be able to communicate some things to your tenant, but ultimately it's the landlord's responsibility to make sure that those rules are met and complied with. And so if the tenant starts violating any of those pet rules, or smoking where it's prohibited, or damages the common areas either during their move in or move out, or any place in between, those costs are going to go back to you. And many buildings that have amenities, if there's misuse, that becomes your responsibility. So making sure that the tenant is aware of the building's rules, receives updated policies, and remains in compliant is going to be critical. And so you're going to be responsible for your tenant's behavior. You want to make sure that you're doing your due diligence to make sure you're putting a great tenant in there, because that is your responsibility. So when we're involved, we expand upon the lease language. We make sure that we're utilizing the building's specific addenda. We're going to go over a handful of things with the tenant to make sure that they're going to be in the right possession for success. And then, of course, we're going to monitor for compliance. And if there are things that come up, like not having sufficient carpet, or loud noise, or maybe even the tenant forgot to change the battery in the smoke detector and it's chirping and annoying everybody on the floor, these are things that we can become involved in. And we couple that with periodic inspections to make sure that the maintenance and compliance remains in place, right? And so good property management and also a violation prevention. Now, I did expand upon insurance a little bit, and this is kind of an in-between slide, but you know, you got to be making sure that you know the differences on the insurance coverage, and make sure that you're going to be covered because the building's master policy tends to cover general common elements, the building's components, and areas defined in the government documents. It may not cover flooring, your cabinets, your interior finishes. So if there is something that could become problematic within your unit, you need to know the difference between whether or not that's going to be covered under a liability policy or if it's going to be the resident's responsibility or your landlord's policy because you no longer likely will be maintaining it as a homeowner's policy. It becomes that landlord's rental policy. You know, that will cover those interior improvements, the liability, the loss of rent. In many cases, owners will have that additional coverage, or water loss. But now, a lot of times, the tenants' policies are going to be covering their personal possessions, additional living expenses, and an additional liability on that front. And so, while the building insures the building, the landlord insures the unit and their liability, and the tenant insures their belongings and their personal liability. It's an easy way to kind of walk through that in case there were something to arise. You know, I guess an easy example that many people do or have the potential of encountering is going to be a water leak between units, depending upon the severity and who was at fault. You know, the different policies may all begin talking to each other to figure out which one ultimately is responsible, whether or not it was the toilet or the tenant overflowing the bathtub, or if it was the HVAC leaking from one unit to another, or a roof leak that eventually got all the way down to the basement. You know, those are differentials that we need to be mindful of, and the insurance would kick in depending on where that belongs. And it typically will be related to the extent of the damage, right? Okay, so let's go to this transition from the home ownership to the landlord. You know, you got to make the shift. It's no longer your personal use. It's no longer your home. It is now moving to an investment mindset, right? There's an emotional aspect. There's a financial relation to this, but we want to talk about pricing based on the market, right? We want to prepare the property for the rental market. Sometimes that's going to be just the cosmetic stuff like painting, cleaning. Otherwise, we're also going to have the licensing. But you know, as far as what the prices allow, we want to get as much as we possibly can, but you have to be mindful of what things are renting, and sometimes that lines up with what your overall expenses are, your mortgage, your interest. I'm sorry, your mortgage, your taxes, your association fee, your insurance. But at the same time, you know, you can't necessarily always get more than what people will pay. And so we are constantly working with owners on that. And then, of course, the timelines and the demand. These are aspects that us as property managers are constantly keeping an eye on so that we can give appropriate guidance. And generally, the best tenants are the ones that have options. They want well-maintained, attractive properties, and the better you keep the unit, the more attractive those applicants will become. You know, we do want to do a deep dive on their background and making sure that we expand upon our screening efforts. There has been an uptick of fraud, not necessarily just the fraudulent activity that many people have experienced in the past, where you may see a posting on Craigslist that's not yours, but somebody's asking money to be wired to some place in another country, nation. But at the same time, we also have been able to see an uptick of fraudulent activity within the community where the potential applicants are utilizing somebody else's false information to be able to apply, to be able to get in and walk their way all the way through the rental application process, to be able to get keys and potentially even move in. There was an article about a scenario like this out in California, and I've heard rumblings around the country about how this Fraudulent activity is becoming increasingly sophisticated, and you need to know what you're looking for so that you can avoid that from happening to you, right? Now, you need, um, for those absentee landlords, this is especially critical. It's hard to manage from around the corner. It's even harder to manage from a distance, right? You need to make sure that you have plans in place for the coordinating the maintenance and repairs, handling that tenant communication and responding to those urgent and emergency situations. So like, let's talk about a couple scenarios. What happens if there's a water leak at 2 a.m., right? What happens if the HVAC fails during that heat wave? Or if the tenant finds the resident in violation, or if there's emergency access that needs to be granted, or even just more recently, we were requested an inspection by the building, and we need to help facilitate that with the resident who coincidentally is out of town, but they need to get into this one unit while nobody else is around because they're doing every other unit in the building on that same day. They can't just do a one-off on another time. So if you're living in California and you own that unit in DC, who's handling these issues? This is the great opportunity for us to come in because not only can we do the vendor coordination, we can handle the emergency response. We are constantly in communication with the tenants, as well as the building, the board, the managers. And so, just be mindful that that distance can magnify small problems. All right. So many people are able to navigate it, but many look to us for additional guidance and having those boots on the grounds and a local presence. Now, I'm going to do a quick brief because we're next month's webinar. I'm going to have a speaker that had been with me previously. Sean Hilgendorf is our government affairs director with the DC Association of Realtors. With the primaries coming up this upcoming Tuesday, the mayor's budget passing the first reading, a second later this month, and a handful of new and projected legislation that may pass in the upcoming months. He's going to help join me and just go over a lot of these so that everybody's in the know and be able to go over a couple questions just so you know what our efforts are looking like and what those updates are looking like in the industry and what property owners need to be watching for as things progress these next few months. So please do sign up in advance for that. And we'll also share the link in this summary. All right. So I began to mention why professional management matters, but talk through this with me. The tenant screening. You really have to be thorough on your tenant screening and the placement, which can be a challenge for anybody just in their own right, let alone whether or not they're here or not, right? You need to have your positioning in place to be able to collect the rent and track it and be able to account for it, but also be able to take action if and when the resident fails to make those payments, right? And additionally, the compliance, ongoing management and oversight is critical to make sure that the property is being maintained and it's as it should, and that the tenant's doing what they're supposed to do. So our involvement in this helps reduce the risk and improves that consistency. And we have added that extra value of the better tenants, the fewer issues, the stronger long-term performance. Because in the end of the day, going through all of this, it's not just about collecting the rent, it's protecting an investment, an asset, right? And so all of these challenges do start to add up, and your time, as much or little as it may be, is not deductible, but our fees are. So wrapping things up before we get to the Q&A, that's the EJF advantage. We are overlapping on both sides. We streamline the communication across our teams. We have faster resolution of issues, especially when it is a building or a unit-to-unit concern. We're able to help facilitate a lot of it. And we're also working to improve those compliance and the tenant experience above grade because we are involved with everything that the buildings are doing. And it helps eliminate those surprises and produce better results for our owners. So when we are going through this, we know the properties inside and out. We know who to reach when things are coming along, and they know who to reach out to if there's issues that need to be coordinated amongst your units. And so putting all that together, we don't just manage the unit, we understand that whole ecosystem surrounding the apartment and the property. So with that said, let's jump into a few case studies. There's two approaches. Realistically, either you're generally self-managing or you're hiring a professional company to do this. A lot of the self-managing owners don't know what questions to ask, and that may result in some delayed approvals. It could incorporate not knowing how to address things with the tenant or the violations, or if there are challenges that are being evolving over time, how to best address it. And of course, it increases the stress and the unexpected costs that you may not be mindful of until you've crossed that road and experienced it firsthand. Having us involved, we've already gone through a lot of this. We already learned from experience. We know exactly who to reach out to and how, and we make sure that those T's are crossed and those I's are dotted so that you are in compliance and you have that support going forward. So the preparation, the communication, the line management, this is what happens, and this is the benefit of having us involved from day one, whether or not it's a building managed by EJF or not. So here's quick takeaways. Please just make sure that you do, in fact, review the bylaws before you do anything with your property as you begin to explore the options of converting it over. Be mindful that you are and will remain responsible for your tenant's behavior. You know, the planning ahead goes a long way, right? And our professional management helps reduce the risk and the stress. So when you get those things together, you've got the full width, right? And fewer surprises. So let me see. And if anybody has any questions, please post them and I'm happy to expand upon them. One question. I was told by EJF that my apartment monthly rental amount has been increased 2 times within a year. I'm not sure about many buildings, but most properties only have one increase per year. I would definitely double check the terms of the lease to review to make sure that everything is in order and that the proper notices have been given. And of course, with that, there's always going to be the bigger conversation about rent control versus not and what those allowances may be. But for us, when we're talking about lease extensions with owners, we're always digging into what the tenant's performances look like, maybe factor in what the building association fees and the overall expenses the owner may have, to be able to determine what makes an appropriate recommendation to not only increase the rent on a potentially annual basis, but on the month-to-month. And typically we do differentiate those two depending on what the owner's intentions for the property may be. For new landlords, what does DC government require to become a landlord? All right. Well, obviously I've mentioned the licensing and we've done a handful of webinars about that in the past. So if you're going to begin exploring those avenues, you need to make sure that you get the appropriate licensing. With that, there's going to be the inspection to make sure that it is in fact suitable accommodations. You need to apply for the license. Now, many owners may put the property into an LLC or a trust or some other entity as opposed to having it in their own name. Based on my understanding, it is not a requirement that you do so. The property is the business. You can be a sole proprietor of that business, but that is something that some people have explored in the past. But you do have to navigate the licensing process, which starts off with the inspection. And I've walked owners through that a lot of times, especially as many owners are reaching out to me and having those preliminary conversations while they are still living there. Working through that licensing process is an easy thing to do to get a head start on that bigger equation, as I'd alluded to earlier. Getting done out of the way, be able to establish the license. You can apply for either a 2-year or a 4-year, and then you have to go through after the license has been issued, make sure that you don't miss the last step, which is the rent registry. Essentially 1 year ago, they digitized it and that switched over from the rental accommodations approach to how they were handling the registration and processing. What does the screening of applicants? Who does the screening of applicants and what's the fee? All right, well, DC actually put a restriction on what you can charge for the application fee. Residents can't be charged more than $54, I believe, $54, $55, something in that range. So you're going to need to have the residents, we have our residents pay for the application fee per adult applicant. Then we're able to process the applications from there. In terms of screening, I would recommend that you always do screen your potential future residents. And I have unfortunately had a lot of owners that sidestep that process because they think they know them. But life happens. People lose jobs, couples break up. You really want to make sure that you know what it looked like at that snapshot in time and that they have a proven effort to be able to make sure that those ends are meet and those obligations are adhered to, because quite frankly, going through the process of an eviction in the city is lengthy. So you really want to be do your due diligence on the front end. What are the taxes like for a rental condo? Well, I mean, ultimately, the taxes are going to be very similar, but based off of the unit and the square footage and other factors that are brought into it. But I would recommend that you look at what you are currently paying and make sure that you've removed the homestead exemption, which usually saves you a handful of percents off the top of that obligation, because once you're no longer living there, you no longer are qualify for the homestead exemption, right? Many people do catch that when they're going through the licensing process, but I've seen a few that don't. And I would also say that many do not update their mailing address, which I would also suggest you attend to during that process. So that way, once you are gone, DC knows where to send notices, how to reach you, and that they know that you're no longer residing in the property, right? Okay. I hope that answered all of the questions. And I appreciate everybody for joining me today. Sorry again for the slight adjustment with Sarah out, but I think I covered just about everything she would have wanted us to touch on. And if there are any other questions that come up along the way, please don't hesitate to shoot me an email or give me a call. I'm happy to go through it with you. And for those owners that are beginning to navigate these next steps with their property, I'd be very happy to go over what that looks like and give you guidance based on what your timelines and your plans and your expectations are. That way we have everything covered. All right. Thank you very much for joining me today. And I do hope you'll register for next month's session with Sean to expand upon a lot of what's going on in this city so that you can plan appropriately.